Hi, I'm Norah O'Donnell, and this is Person to Person. Our guest today is Luke Russert.
Let's go live to Capitol Hill. NBC's Luke Russert is there.
Luke Russert is an Emmy Award-winning reporter and now an author. In 2008, he was thrust into the spotlight after the death of his well-known father.
This is Meet the Press with Tim Russert.
Renowned journalist and moderator of Meet the Press, Tim Russert. After his moving eulogy in front of future presidents, sitting senators, and other dignitaries.
I love you, Dad, and in his words, let us all go get him.
He took a job at NBC News, first as a youth correspondent, then cutting his teeth on Capitol Hill, covering Congress. But after 8 years of following in his father's footsteps, he decided to forge a path of his own, leaving everything he's known behind to travel to 67 countries over 3 years. He documents his journey in his new book, Look for Me There, Grieving My Father, Finding Myself. We sat down with him ahead of Father's Day for an intimate, person-to-person conversation. Luke Russert, it's so good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor. The band's back together.
The band is back together, yes. How have you been?
I've been well. It's been really rewarding to have this book out in the wild.
It's a beautiful book. It's fun to read. And of course, knowing you and your family, I learned a lot along the way. And it's hard to believe it's been 15 years since your dad, Tim Russert, died.
Yeah, it's been 15 years, and I think about him every single day. But with the passage of time, it has gotten a little bit easier, as I mentioned in the book. And I think back at just all that has happened in my life and where the country has gone over that time. And I often think about what would Tim say right now? What would Dad say right now? But I'm fortunate enough to get into those meditative spaces where I think about that and then I almost converse with him. So that's been really rewarding.
Yeah, given the politics of the last several years and our last couple elections, I think about Tim a lot. About what Tim would have to say about kind of the current state of affairs, the kinds of questions he would ask. I mean, I think about him a lot, too, as my former boss at NBC. I do want you to read from your book, if you don't mind. I put a little note in here and highlighted it.
Let me see.
If you don't mind reading.
What do we got there? Sure. I take a moment backstage to think. Tim Russert died at the height of his career. He died as the nominees for the 2008 presidential election were being settled on after a historic primary season. He died as television media reached its pinnacle in the last hours before a new digital world. He died just after his son graduated from a Jesuit college. He died days after praying in the Vatican. He died in his favorite season, summer. He died on the Friday before his favorite holiday, Father's Day. The man who wrote books about fatherhood, which caused so many people to reconnect with their dads, actually died on Father's Day weekend. A fitting ending. Yeah.
I mean, it gives me the chills hearing you read it. And of course, when I read it, I thought about that because we're just around Father's Day.
I got a question from somebody and they said, were you ever angry about your dad passing away? Were you ever consumed by anger? Because that happens for a lot of people when they're experiencing grief. Why me? Why did this happen? And those words that I just read have always, in a sense, given me comfort. The timing was poetic. You knew my father. He always had good timing. That was one of the things that he always would try to do. Yeah. And I think that's one of the reasons why, while I've been very sad over the years at times, I was never angry because I almost said if he had to leave, that was a good time to go.
How do you honor him on Father's Day?
It's interesting, of the remembrances, so that I always think about the birthday and then obviously the day he passed, and there's Father's Day. Father's Day for a long time was really the most difficult one for me. But then I was lucky. Some friends of mine made me a godfather. I'm a godfather to a few kids, and I try to hang out with my friends and their children. And you see the twinkle in the eye of a young child, and they're playing baseball or go to a park or something like that. I get what the whole holiday is about, and that's brought me a lot of joy. But I understand, there's a lot of folks that they turn off their social media on Father's Day. Companies now say you can opt out of ads about Father's Day, so I get how it's hard. And it was hard for me for a long time. But I was thankfully able to channel that and see the beauty of another generation coming up and what it means.
Yeah. I mean, your dad, not only in writing those books, Big Russ and Me, about his own dad, he was really so proud to be your dad. He would frequently do the Today Show at 7:07, right in the morning. And sometimes MSNBC would ask him to stay later. And he said, no, I have to take Luke to school. And he was insistent on it. He
was very protective of those moments. And people ask me, they say, what is the greatest gift your dad ever gave you? And I always say it was time, but it was honest time. And in the time that we shared together, he was very inquisitive about my life. He was very friendly, would ask questions about my friends. He would sort of try and craft the whole circle of what his son was going through, what his best friend was going through, and offer his advice where I welcomed it or was needed, or might try to nudge me in ways he thought would be beneficial. But people would ask him, what's your biggest accomplishment? And he said, when I'm gone from this earth, the only thing I really truly will be judged on is how good of a father I was. And he believed that. And I think that is something that I certainly carry with me and am very much aware of that love and that bond. Mm-hmm.
Well, he was my boss for many years. He came
Loved you.
I know, came to our wedding, which was great. And I know he would saddle up to the bar at the restaurant many times.
The super mug, that's right.
And have the super mugs. And I can remember I had twin children in 2007.
Yeah.
And then in 2008, well, later in 2007, I was pregnant again, and I was embarrassed to tell people.
You had to tell him.
And I had to tell him. And Jeff said, why are you embarrassed to tell Tim? He'll think it's great. And I can remember going into Tim's office, and I think I was in his office for about an hour. And I remember him saying, if I had ever had a girl, I would have named her Riley. And so when I got home from work, Jeff said, how'd the meeting with Tim go? And I said, oh, he was great. I mean, he kept going on and on. We had this long conversation. It was probably the longest conversation I'd ever had with him.
That's fun.
And then I told him the story. And of course, I have a daughter named Riley.
And what touches on something that I learned after he passed away, there were so many folks that reached out to me and they said, I was going through a difficult situation, or I was having a child, or I lost somebody, or had a job switch. And your dad was so kind to me and understanding. Mm-hmm. And I think especially in the media world, where you see that struggle between work-life balance. I mean, you think about it from 35,000 feet. It's kind of crazy. You have to go into your boss's office and be like, oh, I'm so sorry I'm bringing in another child into this world, which is a joyous, beautiful thing to do, right?
Yes.
And he was conscientious of that and understanding of that. And that's the perspective I miss the most.
Your dad's book, Big Russ and Me, and I remember when that came out, it ends with a letter to you. And he writes, Luke, man, along the way, you'll hit some hurdles and experience some setbacks. I will always be there for you. But remember, while you are always, always loved, you are never, never entitled.
Yeah.
As Grandpa likes to say, the world doesn't owe you a favor. You do, however, owe this world something. To live a good and decent and meaningful life would be the ultimate affirmation of Grandpa's lessons and values.
Yeah, yeah.
How do you feel about that now?
It's such a beautiful letter, but it's a letter that, to be honest with you, I did struggle with at times. I thought it was a letter of great expectation being placed on shoulders. How am I supposed to do that, Dad? You're not around to guide me anymore. And a lot of my book is about that, is the journey to get to that place. But ultimately, what I realized is that here's somebody who was at the top of his career. Here's somebody who was around popes and presidents and prime ministers and seemingly had it all when he was going out onto his next life. And the most important thing to him was just living a good, honest, and meaningful life. One of the things he used to always say is Luke 12:48, biblical scripture, to whom much is given, much is expected. And I struggled with that for a long time. What is expected? Do I have to do great things? Do I have to be just as good as you, Dad, better than you, Dad? And I realized that, no, it was what's in that letter. Just be a good human being. Just be kind. And that's the greatest thing you could ever do in this life. And that now resonates with me. I'm not afraid of it like I was for some time.
Mm-hmm. All right, when we come back, we're going to talk to Luke about his world travels and finding his own identity. That's next. And we're back with Luke Russert. All right, your new book, Look for Me There, Grieving My Father, Finding Myself. Yeah. Have you found yourself?
I like to say I'm a work in progress, but the most important thing was on that journey, I got to a place of peace in regards to losing Dad. And that was a real milestone for me because I struggled with his grief for a long time. I didn't even know that I was struggling with his grief for a while. But as I started to travel, I realized that one of the things I had done right after he passed away is I jumped into the hard work of being on network news. And the greatest cure for misery was hard work, I thought. And while I enjoyed the success that came with work and I enjoyed being on Capitol Hill and learning so much about American government, I never really grieved Dad. And it wasn't until I traveled the world and became conscious of that I was really able to take a step forward and being more at peace. As far as me, still work in progress there.
You know what? We're all a work in progress.
We all are a work in progress,
we are all
right?
a work in progress. And I thought, actually, that's one of the most touching things about the book. I mean, not only is it so honestly written, and it's beautifully written,
Thank you.
Your vulnerability really shines through. And the idea that you kind of have to live up to or think you have to live up to some sort of expectations that either you've made up or you think other people have made up.
Yeah.
And you're really trying to keep talking about finding yourself, finding inner peace. I kept underlining those words. Do you feel more at peace?
I certainly do. And I think one of the things that I mentioned is I leave the job and the idea is, okay, there's going to be this aha moment. There's going to be this revelatory just thing that's going to happen right around the next bend. But that's not how life works. Life is a long journey. I would journal all the time. I would write down bits and pieces of what I learned in different countries and how it affected me and what I thought about it. But the most important thing I learned was to become more comfortable in uncertainty. And the more comfortable I got in uncertainty, the more I was able to see things for what they were, which is, hey, you know, no one's expecting you to be Tim Russert. You're a 22-year-old kid when he died. People want you to be you in the most comfortable way you can. And the most important person in your life, your dad, he would want that. And so it took me a while to get there because, especially as a young man, you often think of vulnerability as weakness, right? Because you're taught on the sports field, don't be vulnerable, be tough, be protected, go forward in a way in which you're not going to be exposed, don't have unforced errors, et cetera. And what I learned is that, no, by opening myself up, by being more vulnerable, I actually got to a place of understanding, which was, hey, why do I think this way? Or, you know what, you did go through something difficult. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be anxious. That's a natural reaction. All the storing and ignoring that had happened over all those years, that's a lot of weight, and that's going to catch up to you.
He did have these familiar phrases that he used to say all the time. I mean, every time I would see him in the NBC bureau, he would say, "What do you know?"
Yeah.
What do you know? And in many times I would, you know, pull in late to something and I would think, oh my gosh, if I run into Tim, he's going to ask me, what do you know? And so I would sit in the car and make a phone call so that I'd have some scooplet in order to deliver to him in case I ran into him on the way back, you know, through the hallway by his office back to my office. He was known for sort of those frequent phrases.
What do you know? Go get 'em was another one that he used to say all the time.
What a country.
What a country, that he's adopted from my grandfather, which was very neat.
One of the things you talk about in the book is covering Capitol Hill, covering John McCain, forging a friendship with him, and then wanting to go to Vietnam to see, of course, where he was held as a prisoner of war for 5 years.
It was one of the most incredible visits I made on this journey. And I'd gotten to know John McCain. He told vicious jokes, and it was a very funny guy, especially as a young man when I was in my 20s. Talking to him was always a real treat.
He had a nickname for you.
Skywalker, that's right. And what was, I always respected from a young age the fact that he had spent all that time in the prison camp, and that he had also had a chance to leave early because of who his father was, and he didn't. He said, no, I'm going to leave here in the order of which I came. And when I went and I saw that prison cell, and you see how dark it is, how just scary and decrepit and most humiliating and just so full of fear, if anything else, I don't think I could have lasted 3 hours. And the fact that he lasted all those years, it really resonated with me as well. You can say what you want about somebody politically, but when they talk about their war experience, what they went through, they're all patriots. They really are. Faith
of My Father's, to me, is one of the most searing books I've ever read, where he talks about his time as prisoner of war. And while a lot of this book is about grieving your father and finding yourself, you do travel with your mom.
Yeah.
As you point out, for the first time in your in your 30 years,
Right.
you find yourself traveling with your mom.
Yeah.
And for people who don't know your mom, Maureen Orth is a celebrated, brilliant journalist and an intrepid traveler.
She is.
Herself. And you have a bit of a complex relationship with her.
I do, and it's one that I explore in the book. The easiest way to explain it is that my dad was the good cop and she was the bad cop. And growing up, that was difficult for me because I didn't understand why she was so hard on me. And one of the beauties of traveling with her was, even though it was my early 30s, I finally got to understand who she was, independent of that role of mom. And when I traveled with her, and I saw how curious she was, I saw the motor that she had, how she would never take no for an answer, how she was fearless, I suddenly understood, oh, here's somebody that worked so hard her entire life for everything she had, but also wanted me to see the ways of the world and also wanted me to know that you gotta engage and you gotta be tough and you gotta be proactive. She saw sort of a kid that you're in this bubble, don't get too spoiled, be aware. And it's been greatly beneficial for our relationship. I totally understand where she was coming from now, all those years where I may have been a little bit mad at her as a young kid.
Yeah. I so related to her in so many ways, and I'm so in awe of your mother, truly. And part because when I was traveling with Donald Rumsfeld after 9/11, and we're in Tajikistan of all places, I turn around and there's your mother traveling alone in a place that no man or woman would really want to travel alone to.
And that's her. And after 9/11 happened, she said, I want to get to the bottom of this because there's got to be something else at play aside from just the terrorism factor. And sure enough, she went to her editors at Vanity Fair and she said, the money that is funding the Taliban is coming from this illicit drug trade. It is coming from the poppy seeds that are being grown over there. I want to go to Afghanistan. They go, well, you can't go to Afghanistan. How about Tajikistan right next door? And she went there a few months after 9/11, completely fearless, basically on her own accord. And I remember I asked my dad at the time, I said, should we be worried? And he was like, honestly, because I'm worried for the Taliban, considering it's your mom.
That's funny. Yeah. So you're traveling for years. You're in your 30s. Your mom at one point wants you to stop. Yeah,
she says she has a mother's intuition. She goes, you're untethered, and where does this end up? What are you doing with your life? You're kind of just drifting now. And at first I was, wait, that's hypocritical, Mom, because you got married later than most women did at your time. You had me later. You took some time to travel. And she said, yes, but it was between assignments and whatnot. And so I said, okay. And at first I was tuning her out, but then I realized she was right. And I was also trying to run away from something, and that was the grief of losing him. Because I felt if I ever had to process that grief, then he would really be gone, and I didn't want to face that.
Mm-hmm. You also write about visiting Jerusalem.
Yeah.
What did you find there that helped bring you clarity?
So I started to write the book, and I had this voice in my head that was saying, you haven't gone to the Holy Land. It's a little weird. Go to the Holy Land. Go to the Holy Land. I was trying to turn it off. I was like, I don't want to travel anymore. And it's like, no, you got to go to the Holy Land. So I ended up going there and grew up in the Catholic faith, still Catholic. And I go into Christ's tomb and I say this prayer, please show me something, show me something, show me something. What am I supposed to do with my life? I'm writing now and I've had this incredible experience, all this privilege. What am I supposed to do? And it's this voice in my head goes, oh, he heard you, just go pray. I said, what? More prayer? Oh gosh, more meditation. I've been doing that for so many years. And I walk outside and it's night. All the stores are closing. But there's a guy on the street and he sells yarmulkes, and there's a Buffalo Bills yarmulke, which of course is my father's favorite NFL team. And I said, okay, Dad, there you are. And so I saw that and I go to the Wailing Wall and I have a wonderful moment, which is the conclusion of the book. But it was something where I realized the importance of being aware of things, aware of signs, aware of symbols, and open yourself up to that. And that was my aha moment, but it took a while to get there. All
right. When we come back, we will have more with what's next for Luke Russert. And we're back with Luke Russert. The other beautiful thing about this book is where you went. I found myself Googling places that I've never been just to sort of see them. So if somebody is looking to travel someplace, what's the most important lesson you learned in your travels?
I think that it sounds so basic, but when you go around and you meet people from all different faiths and all different cultures, it's just be respectful. Something my grandfather, Big Russ, used to say, it's nice to be important, it's more important to be nice. And it takes just as long to be nice to someone as it does to be mean. So that lesson from South Buffalo, New York, works worldwide.
It does work. Well, congratulations. The book is excellent.
Thank you.
And what's next for you?
Are you hiring? No. I like the storytelling.
You think you'll go back into television?
I don't know. I like the storytelling space, whether it's writing another book, possibly going back into television and doing something in the long form space. One of the things I did really learn while traveling is the value of nuance and how oftentimes we try to make things black or white, but most of what the world is and where reporting should be is in the gray. There's a lot of complicated things in there that need to be explored. So I could be of value in that space. I learned a lot about that.
Mm-hmm. I appreciated how you talked about learning patience, too, on your travels.
Yeah. And that's something that, as you know, in the media business is not something that it comes right away. It's a learned trait. And I became way more patient. Part of that was when you're in a foreign country and you can't speak the language and there's no ride for you, what are you going to do? You got to learn how to wait. But I also understood that for patience, it adds to respect for a lot of people. And I often think, like, is it worth getting all riled up about something? Take a breath, take a pause, and only really exert that if you seriously need to.
Well, I so respect what you have done in your travels and the lessons that you're sharing with us, and congratulations on this book. It's not easy to write a book.
So. I really appreciate it, and it's such an honor being on with you. You know, I feel like I've grown up with you, Norah.
I know.
You were hired at almost the same age I was at MSNBC, so you're doing great things. Congratulations. It's wonderful to see.
I was 25 when I was hired by NBC.
And you're
49 now.
Barely.
Luke Russert, thank you so much.